In the next two lectures, we'll look at how to find stuff in Linux. You probably already know how to do that in Windows. There's several different ways to do that. It's imperative because we've got so many files in Linux and in all the operating systems that we have the capability of finding what we need to find and doing it efficiently. But for some reason with Linux, there's a confusion about a couple of commands I'm going to go over that are extremely important, and they're, like I said, they're often confused. So I have a book here, Virtual Private Networks. Okay, so that's the name of the book. As you know, files have names as well. Now also, this book has contents in it. See all the contents? Now, if you want to search for the title of a book, just like the name of a file, there's a particular command you use. Or let's say you're looking for all books that were published in 2012. Or you're looking for all books that are at least 400 pages long. See the similarity between those? The same thing also occurs with files, is that there's certain characteristics of the files, just like there's characteristics of books, where you would search for example, files that were created on a certain date, a specific file name, a file that is at least a megabyte in size, or a file that is in between 100 kilobytes and 600 gigabytes. So that's one command. The other command is to say, okay, find all books that have the word virtual private network in its contents. And notice I didn't say anything about the title of the book. I said in the contents. So you may have 3, 4, 5, 10,000 books, search hits that come back and say these 5,000 books have virtual private network or Linux or Daytona State College in the contents. So that's what we'll be talking about for the next couple of lectures. The difference between the find command and the grep command, because those are used in different situations. All right, let's start out by looking at how we would go about finding files that match certain criteria. Just as I indicated in the introduction, that we could find books with that have a particular keyword in their name, such as virtual private networks or Linux or something similar, or they are written in English, or they are at least 400 pages long, and so on. There's a particular command we would use in a similar fashion if we wanted to find files that have certain matching criteria. Let me make this a little smaller so you can see it. And the first one we're going to go over fairly quickly, and this is something called the locate command. And this is the most simple command because this works in a similar fashion to some of the older search capabilities in Windows, and what this does is it allows you to search from the command line by a particular file name, and we'll look at that in just a second. Now this is based upon an index database of file names, so obviously that means that the files on the media have to be indexed at least once before the locate command can work. And we update the database using the update db command. And once you do that, and depending upon how many files you have on the hard drive, this could take just a few seconds to several minutes. But it works fairly quickly because now you're just searching in an index database. But notice that it's limited in that we can only look for a file by part of its file name. So let's jump over to Linux. I wanted to show you something here. Here I'm running a version, a Linux distribution rather, that is based on Red Hat. It's an unbranded Red Hat distribution called CentOS. This works great. It's really fast. Go up to my virtual machine library, and I'm going to stop this here. And here is my Mint 13. And one more. Here's Ubuntu. So I've got 3 different Linux distributions open, and the idea behind this simple little illustration is to show you that Linux is Linux is Linux, and the GNU utilities that we've been using all throughout the semester works all across the spectrum of Linux distributions. So if I may demonstrate something to you in one version of Linux, some students seem to be flabbergasted and frustrated because it's not the exact same version or the exact same Linux distribution as we're working with at the time. You know what? It doesn't matter. If I say drive a car to the dollar store. I'm looking outside right now and I can see about 25 different cars. The rules of the road don't change. The way that steering wheels work, that tires work, that engines work aren't going to be that different or sufficiently different from car to car to make me think like, oh my gosh, I'm frustrated. I don't know how to drive down to the dollar store because I'm driving a Ford instead of a Chevy. So just to show you what I'm talking about, remember I said update DB updates the database of the index of file names. You have to run that at sudo. And we're done. So now let's locate a file. And there's all the files based upon the index of file names that have CHOWN, and we'll cover what this means later, in their name. Okay, that was Ubuntu. Okay, here's Mint 64. So let's run the same thing here. And let's locate, well, it looks like the exact same output as we saw in Ubuntu. And the update DB and the locate command worked exactly the same. Well, you say both of those are based on Debian. And, you know, what if I'm using a Red Hat based distribution? Now I'm totally flummoxed. Well, let's take a look. Sudo update DB. This is taking a little longer, and that might be because this is the first time it's been run on this CentOS system. Whereas on the other 2 systems, the Ubuntu and the Mint, there we go, they probably have already been run. So now we locate, change out, there. There's a couple of little differences in there, but by and large, the output is the same. And I know for sure that the commands run exactly the same. And so if you ever sit down at a system and somebody says, well, this is a version of Fedora, I mean, you would be able to run pretty much 99% of the same exact commands on Fedora, which is also Red Hat based, as you would Red Hat or CentOS or Ubuntu or Debian or Mint or any of the other Linux distributions. Okay, so I'm going to pause this and we'll step back on over to Mint here. And, well, let's look at the notes first. And look at find. Now we're looking at a very powerful command, and you can find files based on very, very specific criteria. The difference between locate and find is that find is a live search, and that means that it doesn't have an index database of any criteria. Is that when you hit find and you specify the criteria, it's going to take a little longer and process in a live fashion. But it can be used to match many different criteria. And the great thing about this is that you can find a file and then run a command on it. So isn't that cool? So you may print some things, or you may output them to a file, or you may change the contents of the file based upon what files are returned by the find command. So let's look at some examples of find. So, okay, and these little dashes over here are just bullets, so forget about these. What you see in here, it's highlighted is the actual command. And so we obviously have the find command. The next specific argument, which is optional, is where you would like to start to run the command. So here we're saying find starting where. Where's the dot? We know, if we can remember, that the dot's the parent directory and the single dot is the current working directory. If you leave off this argument, and so there's nothing there, then that defaults to the current directory. Now there's certain different types of files for which you can search. There's you can search by dash type. The D means a directory. Down here, this dash type means file. And as we'll see a little later, you can use the man page to see all the different types of things for which you can search using the find command. So if you don't include the type right here, it's going to default to everything, files, directories, and everything else included. So here's an example where we're finding a file by its name, and this just means, this in the brackets or the greater than lesser than sign means specific file name here. And as you see here, we're searching for maryjones.letter. And so what's the difference between these two commands? Well, actually none, because this says start in the current directory, and this omits that argument, which also means start in the current working directory. And the bottom command is just a little more specific because it's actually indicating the file name. Look at a few more examples. Find, starting with the current directory, all empty files. That is files that are of 0 byte size. Why might you want to find those? Because what we can do is we can find these, we can delete them all in one command line. Boom, we can put that in a script and have that run every day to delete all empty files. Okay, now let's look at the next example. Find, starting with your home directory. So is this and this the same? Think about for a second. Well, it depends. It depends upon here with the dot where you are currently. If you're in your home directory, then yeah, that's the same as indicated with the tilde. Okay, the dash size. So let's say we're looking for very large files. Here we're saying 10G with G indicating gigabytes. Notice the plus here. The plus says greater than. The minus sign is for less than. So if this was a minus, this would indicate less than 10 gigabytes. If you don't have a plus or a minus, that means exactly 10 gigabytes. And that's probably never going to be what you mean. You're usually going to have a less than or a plus there. Okay, let's look at another example. Give you a second. Let's think about this. Find, starting with the VAR log, and VAR usually contains log files, the VAR directory. Dash size plus 10 megabytes. So wait a second, here's a second dash size. 12 megabytes minus. This indicates find all files or directories, which isn't going to make any sense. Or sockets, because they're not indicating a type here, right? that's in between the sizes greater than 10 megabytes but less than 12 megabytes. Okay, let's go look at some examples. Let's go back to our Mint. Let's clear the screen. Okay, so we want to find, starting in the current directory, we can have a type file, not looking for directories, but files, and whose name includes bash .bash. Notice again I'm using this wildcard, and I'm also using the quotes here, and the reason I'm using the quotes is because we have an asterisk here, and we'll try in a second to see if that makes any difference if we use the quotes or not. But let's see if there's any regular file in the current directory that starts with .bash. Well, there's one file right there. There's a single file. Okay, let's see how many times we can find a file that has the word error in it under VAR Log. So we're going to start there. We want files and name and begin with the word error. Okay, now we're not using the quotes. And notice that we have here a couple of permission denieds. And the reason is that we don't have, because we're running this as a regular user, that's me, PC, instead of running it with sudo as root, is that we don't have the capability of reading those directories. So let's arrow back up. Let's hit Control A to go to the beginning. That's something new for you, Control A. Sudo find, and we don't have the permission denied, but there wasn't anything that matched that in the in those directories. So you see here that the quotation marks didn't matter, but it's something that you can play around with and see. If you're unsure of something, go ahead and try it out to see whether it works or not. It may or may not. Okay, let's look for large files. Let's look for, in fact, let's look for empty files. Find, let's start in the current directory because I think I might have some. Actually, let me pause the video and let me create some. Oops. Give a hint away. Okay, so we're going to find, starting with the current directory, and notice that this is recursive, which means that it's not just going to look in the current directory, it's all going to look at every directory below the current directory. And we kind of saw that with using VAR Log, and it would try to traverse other directories below that. But we're going to say, in fact, let's leave out the dot, and let's just say space, because it's going to default to the current directory. And whose, wow, so it's showing us, scroll back up here, notice here's a 2.doc I created, that's going to be empty, and notice though, because we didn't specify type, that it's also showing the empty directories, downloads, templates, desktop, and there's quite a few configuration files in here as well. Let's go back up, arrow back up, and let's run that with type file. See, now we're only getting the files. It's another one I created, one.txt. So those are empty files. Don't believe me? LSAL, one.txt, nothing in it. Let's go back up and change this to D for directory. And those are the empty directories. Okay, so we saw empty. Let's look for files greater than 1 gigabyte. Let's say greater than 100 megabytes. I don't know how larger files I have on here if one exceeds a gigabyte. So find, and let's start from root. Boy, this will take a while, so I might pause the video. Type file, and whose size is greater than 100 megabytes. Let's hit enter. Oh, I get a bunch of permissions denied. So go back up with the arrow key, hit Control A to go to the front. And we're still getting some permission denied down here. I'm not sure why. No such file or directory. There's a reason for this, and this is something I'll discuss later on. The proc directory is a special directory. It's not to be explained though now. So let's do clear. Okay, so let's go back up, arrow back up, and let's do greater than 10 megabytes. Okay, so there's a few. Notice that there's the Java virtual machine right here. There's a few library files, and so on. So say, now I'm going to add something special here. Remember I said that based upon these commands, the first command, the find, is that we could do something with those files. And here's what we're going to do. What we're going to do is we're going to send this to another command. So this is, we're going to add something called execute. And what this means is find these files here and then execute the following command on them. ls-al. So up here just gave us a list of the file names, and here we want to say ls-al. There's a delimiter now that is an end to this command that we need, and it's the braces, whoops, followed by the backslash and the semicolon. Why does it need that? Well, this is actually showing this is the end of the command, and this is showing that whatever you find over here, place in these braces. So what did that do? That gave us the list of files that we saw previously, but also ran ls-al on them, right? Let's go back up and look at that command again. Take a look at that. Why don't you run that yourself? Okay, let's hit Control C to get out of there. And let's go into videos. Videos. And I'm going to make some directories. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I just made that directory structure under videos. The video shouldn't have anything in it. Oh, it's got 2.doc, which is one of the files I created. So let's go to 1. Whoops, cd1 touch 1.doc. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a bunch of empty files. Okay, so there are the files. So if I ask you this on a assignment, you know how to go in and create these. So look, we're going back up one at a time. God, don't do that though. If you're actually trying to traverse directories, you would just type cd and enter. Let's delete all those files. How do you do that? What do those have in common? Well, they all end in .doc. Okay, that's fine. What else do they have in common? Well, I just use the touch command, so those are all empty files, right? So we want to find those starting where? In videos, right? In videos and empty. Let's just run that and see what it does. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and dot dot. Okay. We could have added what to it? Type F. In this case, we didn't need it, but notice that the results are the same. We want to delete those, so execute what? Well, what command deletes files? RM. Does that look right? Tell you what, let's run it. Let's run it without that and see what happens. I don't even know it. It shouldn't run. Missing argument. Let's go back and add that. Now, it shouldn't show us anything, right? So let's go back up and find those files and see. And they're no longer there. So you can imagine a very easy way to remove all empty files on your hard drive is to use that command. Although you want to be careful though, because even though it's empty, it still might be a configuration file that you could add something to later on. So it's not necessarily a good idea. Be very, 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 very careful if you did something like this, because that's going to run that from the root or from root. Or we could run that and see what happens. Those are all the empty files. And that ran fairly quickly, didn't it? Okay, last few set of examples. In fact, let's go back here. I'm not done. I want to look at man find. Now we can scroll down. Try scrolling down with the J key. That goes one line at a time. J, 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 J. Remember the space bar? Does it a page at a time? And J goes one line at a time. Hit the K key. One line up at a time. J, K. If you want to go back up to the top, hit small g twice. If you want to go to the bottom, hit a capital G once. So you can scroll to your heart's content. Okay, let's go down and look at some of the parameters here. So I'm just showing you, we're not going to go through all these because you could do an entire class and just fine. Notice here's some tests for dates and times. Notice that you're using the plus and minus and dash n. And this is what we're going to look at shortly in some examples. Amen, A newer, A time. What are these? What is this amen? What is this C men? C newer, C time. And what is the one down here? M men, M time. Let's see what that means. As it turns out, every file has at least 3 dates and time stamps associated with it. And it actually has more for later versions of NT, Windows NT based systems. And in Linux you have 3. You have a modified time, the time that the file was last modified, that is the contents were modified. The time the file was last accessed, that means was it opened? It may be open but not modified, right? But you can't modify it without opening it. And finally, the changed time. And this is different from modified because now the time file change will include change in ownership, permissions, or content. So, as it turns out, there's a command called stat that can be used to view all the information, date and timestamps for a file. So let's go back over here and take a look at that. So what are some of the files we have in here? Let's do stat1.txt. That's the empty file I created. Look at all this great information. It says the file name, the size, the inode number, which is a way that the file system tracks files. It actually doesn't track it by file name. It tracks it by inode number, because you could have 1,000 different files named one.txt, but each one will have their own specific inode number. It's a regular empty file. Here's the permissions on the file, and we'll go over those in more detail later on, but those are very important. Notice this PC. Again, we see that there's a user PC and there's also a group PC. PC, there can only be one user PC, but there could be multiple users in the group PC, and we'll see why that's important later on too. Notice also there's this UID thing, the user ID and the group ID. Well, just like with files, as it so happens, the file system and operating system tracks users by their unique number, not their username. So that UID is important. So notice that there's a UID of 1,000 and a group ID of 1,000 as well. And now we get to the access, modified, and change times. So you notice here that the file was last accessed, and look, they're all exactly the same. So it looks like I haven't accessed the file, modified it, or changed it. It's also a birth down here, if you notice. I'll talk about that in a second. That's the date the file was originally created. I'm not sure why that is not showing anything. But 6/4/2012 at 16:32:15, and in nanoseconds, that's seconds after that, and this is or Eastern, for Eastern time zone. So once we get to October and this switches back over, this is going to be -5 instead of -4. So it gives you an offset from Universal Coordinated Time, which is the old Greenwich time. So let's access that file. Let's go into Nano, and in fact, let's just cat it first. Let's cat that file, 1.txt. Oh, there's nothing in there, right? So we didn't expect anything to show up. Let's stat this. Oh, look what changed. Did the modified change? No. Did change change? No. But look what changed. The access time. And that's correct. So we had to access the file in order to view its contents, even though there are no contents. Let's modify it. Let's go into Nano, 1.txt. Let's type in hello world. Let's write it out with Control-O. 1.txt, and then let's leave. Let's arrow back up to stat one more time. Now what do we have? Okay, the access time didn't change, but the modified time changed. And the modified time changed is because we changed the contents, and notice that the change time changed because the file size changed. Okay, knowing that, let's go back and let's go back and do some searches. Actually, I need to jump back over here to the PDF. Okay, so we can, remember I showed you before, sorry, let's go back over here to man, find a time. Okay, so this stands for access time. File was last accessed n times 24 hours ago. So it figures out how many 24-hour periods ago the file was last accessed. Any fractional part is ignored, so to match a time plus 1, a file has to be accessed at least 2 days ago. Here's the CNewer and CMin right here, and this is dealing with minutes. This is dealing with minutes. Go back up here a little bit. So notice that there's the amin, a time, changed, and there will be a modified as well. mmin. Remember, if you're searching for something, all you have to do is hit the / key and then type in what you're searching for. mmin, hit enter. And then if you want to see the next occurrence, you hit N. It says pattern was not found. So it was the last mmin in here. So let's go in here and let's search for files according to their date and time. Might that be useful? Yes, it might. Hit Q to get out of there. And so let's search for find starting here, let's search for directories underneath here, where the last change minute was less than 20 minutes ago. Whoops. Less than 20. So what directories were changed less than 20 minutes ago? Because recall that I created several of these files in here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So I want to see any directories that were changed less than 20 minutes ago. Let's see if we can do the same thing with files. Starting here, type file, whose last A minute was less than 10 minutes ago. So files that were accessed less than 10 minutes ago. And there are a couple. And this is a file that's used by the terminal. And there's my one.txt. Accessed less than 10 minutes ago. Okay, so let's see if there's any files that were here that were accessed more than 2 days ago. File, I said accessed, right? Accessed minutes 2 days ago. Yeah, oh, and there are quite a few. Oh, because for the installation. Okay. And so there's quite a few. This is for the default installation. And you see there's nothing that I've created in here. It's all files that come with the installation program. Let's find files in the VAR Log directory. Files that were, let's say their size is greater than 1 megabyte. I don't know if it's going to come up with anything. And whose last access time was more than 5 days ago. Oops. Up arrow, a sudo. And there's a couple. Dpackage log, and this is a file that's used with a package program, which is just like the installation program. When you install something on here, you're installing it in packages. And the server managed Samba cores this server message block, which is a protocol that allows old Windows machines and actually new Windows machines and any other operating system to talk to each other. And so these two files here must meet what two requirements? Actually 3 requirements. Actually 4 requirements. These files are under VAR Log or anything underneath there. They're files. Their size is at least 1 megabyte or larger, and their last access time was 4 times 24 hours ago or greater than. Okay, so that ends this lecture on find. This is something that you might use frequently. It's probably confusing to you at first, but if you go in and just start doing what I did, I just started making up stuff. Search for this, search for that. As long as you don't go in and say, you know, I want to execute the RM command, then you're probably in pretty good shape. I wouldn't use the RM command unless you did it just under 1 or 2 directories that you create in your home directory and you know what you're doing. So hopefully you've paused the video and followed along with what I was doing. And if you did, you should have no problem using the find command.